So get ready for this, all right? Today we are diving deep into something you wouldn't expect.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Waffle House.
Waffle House.
The restaurant.
Okay.
Yeah, and hurricanes.
Interesting combination.
Right. You might not think they go together, but they're surprisingly connected when we talk about disaster response.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah. So we've got some YouTube videos we'll be pulling from. One is like a general overview of this whole thing, and the other is an interview with someone who went through a hurricane pretty recently.
Oh, wow. First-hand experience.
Exactly. It's going to get real. But basically what we're going to uncover is how FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, actually uses Waffle House's ability to bounce back from these disasters. Like, they use it as a tool.
Wait, really? That sounds pretty unusual.
It is, but that's what we do here, right?
Yeah.
Uncover the unexpected stuff.
Yeah, I like it. Let's get into it.
All right, so first, just to set the scene, one of the videos shows this map, the FEMA National Hurricane Risk Index. And when you, like, overlay that with where all the Waffle Houses are, it's crazy. There's so much overlap. They even joke that Colorado, like, is basically hurricane-proof because there are 0 Waffle Houses there.
That's funny.
Right. But all jokes aside, this overlap is where the Waffle House Index comes into play.
Okay, the Waffle House Index. Now things are getting interesting.
Right. And that's not some, like, fancy official term or anything.
So what is it?
It started from this guy, Craig Fugate. He was head of FEMA a while back.
Okay.
And during Hurricane Charlie in 2004, he noticed something. Amidst all the chaos, Waffle House was, like, often the only place you could get a hot meal.
Really?
Yeah, they were still running when everything else was shut down.
Wow. That's dedication.
I know, right? So that's what gave Fugate the idea to use how well Waffle House is doing, like whether they're open or not, as a way to gauge how bad a hurricane hit an area.
So basically, if Waffle House is up and running, things aren't too bad.
Yeah, sort of. FEMA already had this color-coded system, you know, green, yellow, red.
Yeah, for like assessing damage and stuff.
Exactly. Fugate just applied that same system to Waffle House. Green means they're fully operational. Yellow means open, but with a limited menu. And red, obviously, means closed.
So the worse the hurricane, the fewer waffles you get.
That's the gist of it.
Interesting. So how does FEMA actually use this information?
Well, let's say a Waffle House is yellow. That could signal power outages, or maybe they're having trouble getting supplies.
Makes sense.
But a red Waffle House, that usually means things are way more serious. Flooding, roads are blocked, gas lines are messed up, stuff like that.
So it's like a quick way to see how bad things are.
Yeah, and by tracking all that, which Waffle Houses are open, closed, doing a limited menu, FEMA can quickly figure out the damage, where to send help first, and what kind of help will be needed.
Wow, I never would have guessed Waffle House was so important for disaster response.
Right. It's pretty fascinating. But hold on, because we've also got this other video, an interview with a guy named Shawn Hendrix. He was in North Carolina after some really bad flooding hit. And his perspective is totally different from these, like, busy open Waffle Houses we've been talking about.
Oh.
Yeah, he describes businesses completely destroyed, people living in tents, debris everywhere, like a totally different picture. And he said this one thing that really stuck with me. There is no money. There's no insurance paying anything out.
That's heavy.
I know, right? It makes you realize that the Waffle House Index, even though it's helpful, doesn't tell the whole story. It's just that first response, the immediate aftermath. But the long road to recovery, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, makes sense. So I guess the question is, if a red Waffle House means things are really bad in the short term, what are the indexes we need to look at for the long term?
Exactly. And that's something we're going to dig into further. We've got to understand those long-term challenges, the rebuilding process, and what it takes to get communities back on their feet.
I'm ready. Let's get into it.
Okay, so back to Waffle House and how they managed to weather these storms so well. The first video goes into a ton of detail about their preparations. I mean, we're talking military-level planning here.
Seriously, like what?
They've got an entire storm playbook, step-by-step guide for everything they need to do.
Wow.
A preseason checklist, stockpiles of food and supplies.
Like what kind of supplies?
Everything. Food, water, even we plan to open signs, ready to go. They pre-grind coffee in case the power goes out, have backup generators. I mean, it's crazy.
Sounds like they've thought of everything.
And it's not just about the stuff. They also prep their employees.
Oh, right, of course.
Like, think about it. wallet cards with all the storm info, key fobs with emergency contacts. They even have this thing called dependency hierarchies.
Dependency what?
Hierarchies. It's basically figuring out which employees are most likely to be able to work, considering their location, their family, if they have transportation, all that.
So it's like a puzzle figuring out who can be where and when.
Yeah, exactly. But, I mean, all this seems pretty high-tech for a company known for, waffles and hash browns.
It's true. But you've got to hand it to them. They're clearly committed to staying open. Remember Hurricane Sandy back in 2012?
Yeah, vaguely.
Well, FEMA tried using other chains as indicators.
Like what?
Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts.
Oh.
But they were all over the place. Opening, closing, you never knew. It just highlighted how different Waffle House is.
So what makes them so good at bouncing back then? Like, what's their secret sauce?
Well, one thing is their company structure.
How so?
Unlike a lot of fast food places, Waffle House doesn't do franchises. They own every single one of their restaurants.
Oh, interesting.
So instead of having all these different owners doing their own thing, it's like one big coordinated team.
Makes sense. So they have more control.
Exactly. And let's not forget, they're mostly in hurricane-prone areas. Being prepared is just good business sense for them.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But they must be making bank during these disasters, right?
Yeah.
Everyone needs to eat, and often they're the only ones open.
Sure, their sales definitely spike. Sometimes it's 2, even 3 times their usual amount. But they downplay the financial side of things.
Really? You're telling me it's not about the money at all?
Well, they do talk about wanting to help their communities. But let's be real, there's a big marketing angle here, too.
What do you mean?
Think about it. Waffle House doesn't do a ton of advertising.
True.
They rely on people talking about them and their reputation for always being there. What better way to boost that than being the only place open when a hurricane hits?
It does kind of make you trust them more, knowing they'll be there.
Exactly. It builds goodwill and reinforces that whole reliable image. Like, imagine you're in this crazy situation, everything's a mess, but bam, there's Waffle House, still open.
Yeah, like a beacon of normalcy.
Right. And that consistency, that reliability, it's not by accident. It all goes back to all those crazy preparations we talked about.
Okay, so let's break it down then. How does all that planning actually translate into those Waffle House Index levels?
Yeah.
Like how do the jump teams and all the stockpiling actually determine whether a restaurant is green, yellow, or red?
Well, it mostly comes down to utilities. If you see a Waffle House completely shut down, that red level, it usually means they've got no natural gas for the grill.
Oh, right. No gas, no cooking.
Sometimes the building itself is flooded or there's no way to get there because the roads are blocked. But their playbook, it actually outlines what they can serve if they have limited utilities, like during a power outage.
Oh, interesting. So what do they do?
For instance, if there's no water, they can use bottled water to make coffee.
Oh, smart.
If the cash register is down, it's cash only.
So they find ways to work around it.
They adapt. They're pros at this point. The video even talks about this one Waffle House in Weldon, North Carolina. They lost power during Hurricane Irene.
Oh, wow.
No waffle irons, obviously. But they were still serving grill items, ham and egg sandwiches, bacon, burgers.
Okay, but hold on. How do you even make coffee without power?
They boiled the water on the grill.
You're kidding.
And they had no lights, so they served until it got too dark to see, closed up, and came back at dawn. It's really impressive.
Okay, now that's dedication. But I gotta ask, why go to such lengths? I mean, it can't be easy or cheap to do this every time a hurricane hits.
That is a really good question.
Yeah.
And it's something we're going to unpack more as we go along.
So we've got Waffle House, like prep for anything, bouncing back from hurricanes like it's nothing. But then we've got Shawn Hendrix talking about people living in tents and businesses being totally wiped out and the insurance companies not paying. It kind of brings you back down to earth.
Yeah, it's a reality check for sure. And it highlights that difference between the immediate response, right after the storm, and the long, long road to actually recovering.
Right.
Hendrix talks about needing all this heavy equipment to clear debris, how expensive it is just to move that stuff out of the way, and then even starting to rebuild. They don't even have the resources for that.
It's crazy. He actually jokes, well, half jokes, that maybe we should just print money and send it.
It's a pretty bold statement,
yeah,
but it shows how desperate the need is. And he's not just talking about handouts, He's saying we need to invest in rebuilding roads and bridges and stuff, support local businesses, give people a real chance to get back on their feet.
Yeah, it's not just about the immediate needs. He's really pushing for, direct financial help. But he also brings up tourism, which I thought was interesting.
Oh, right. What do you say about that?
He says the towns that weren't hit by the hurricane, they need visitors now more than ever, because so many people in those areas rely on tourism for their jobs, their income.
That's a good point. It's like an economic chain reaction.
Yeah, and he's basically saying, don't just send money, come spend money here. Help us rebuild naturally, organically.
I like that. It's a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, because tourism brings in money, creates jobs. It helps those communities get back to some kind of normal.
It makes a lot of sense.
He even suggests things like booking hotel rooms, eating at local restaurants, tipping generously. All those things directly support the community.
Yeah, it's about being conscious of where you spend your money, making choices that help.
But let's be real. Not everyone can just, drop everything and take a vacation to a disaster zone, right? So what about those of us who want to help but can't actually be there?
Right, that's a good point.
What can we do?
Well, Hendrix talks about how hard it is to get aid to the people who need it most. You know, right after a disaster, you have all these volunteers and organizations pouring in. But then as time goes on, the media kind of forgets about it, people forget about it, and the support dries up.
Yeah, he says it's like 90% less people there now.
It's sad, but it's true. Once it's not on the front page anymore, people move on.
It's easy to forget.
Exactly. And that's where targeted donations can make a real difference.
So, who should we be donating to?
Well, he mentions Samaritan's Purse as being really effective on the ground. He also talks about his own experience using Venmo to receive donations and then using that money to meet specific needs in the community. Really targeted stuff.
That's amazing. So you can bypass the big organizations and just help people directly.
Exactly. Sometimes the most impactful giving is at that local level.
Yeah.
You know, finding those individuals or small organizations you trust.
That makes sense. This whole conversation has really changed how I think about disaster response. It's not just about the Waffle House Index. It's way more than that.
Right. It's like a sprint versus a marathon.
Exactly.
We need to think about the immediate needs, for sure, but also the long-term challenges, like how do we get the economy back on track? What about the psychological impact on people? How do we help these communities become more resilient in the future?
It's a lot to consider. And Hendrix actually talks about the psychological impact, how those communities are coping. He says they're tough, they're self-sufficient, they're not going anywhere.
That's powerful.
It is. It shows that human spirit, being able to stay strong, even when things are incredibly hard. But it also reminds us that recovery isn't just about rebuilding buildings.
Right. It's also about restoring a sense of community, that feeling of belonging and hope for the future.
Exactly.
And he brings up something else that I hadn't really thought about before.
What's that?
Land grabs.
Land grabs.
Yeah. After a disaster, people with money can come in, buy up the land really cheap, and rebuild. They didn't lose anything in the storm. But it can push out the people who are already struggling.
Wow, I hadn't even thought of that.
It's a complicated issue, and there's no easy answer. But it shows that we need policies and support systems in place to protect the people who are most at risk of getting left behind during recovery.
Yeah. And he even talks about how these areas could end up becoming like Airbnb havens for rich people, which would completely change the character of the community.
It's a valid concern. Recovery isn't just about rebuilding what was lost. It's also about preserving what makes these places special, their identity, their culture.
Right. And that brings us back to his point about tourism. It's not just about the money. It's about supporting the local businesses, the people, the way of life that makes these communities unique.
It's about experiencing these places for yourself, connecting with the people, and helping them recover in a way that feels real and meaningful.
So if we're talking about those indexes for long-term recovery, maybe one of them should be community engagement, right? How many people are visiting, volunteering, donating, investing their time and resources?
I love that. And maybe we need an index that measures something a little less tangible, like the resilience of the human spirit, that sense of hope and determination that makes people want to rebuild their lives, even after losing everything.
Those are powerful thoughts. And it all goes back to that idea of organic recovery that Hendrix keeps talking about, empowering communities to rebuild themselves, not just physically, but economically, socially, emotionally.
It's about understanding that true recovery is a long game. It takes constant effort, people working together, and a deep respect for what each community needs.
We've gone pretty deep on this whole topic, from the nuts and bolts of the Waffle House Index to all these complex issues around long-term recovery. So as we kind of wrap up this conversation, what are you thinking about? What's really sticking with you?
Honestly, it's that that thread of hope that comes through in everything Hendrix says. You know, it'd be easy to just focus on the devastation.
Right.
It's overwhelming. All that needs to be done. But when you hear him talk about those communities, their grit, that determination to stay and rebuild, it's pretty inspiring. It reminds you that even when things look really bleak, people are incredibly strong.
Yeah, it really makes you realize that this whole Waffle House Index thing, as helpful as it is, it's just a tiny piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. It's a snapshot, you know,
Yeah.
a quick way to see what's needed right away. But real recovery, the long haul, that's a whole different journey, and we need different tools to navigate that.
And that kind of brings us back to Hendrix's question, right? If the Waffle House Index is for that initial response, what are the indexes for the long term? How do we even measure that? Rebuilding people's lives, not just buildings.
It's a good question. Maybe it's about keeping track of how many businesses reopen, the families that go back home, how much the community is involved in the rebuilding.
So we're not just talking about money.
Right.
It's something more.
It's qualitative, yeah.
Right.
Maybe it's about measuring how much of that sense of community comes back, that hope and optimism that Hendrix was talking about. Those things are tough to put a number on, but they're crucial for long-term recovery.
For sure. And we've covered a lot of ground here, from the government aid to the potential of tourism, even those risks of land grabs and the community changing. It's a lot.
It is. And there's no single solution that's going to fit every situation. Each disaster is different. Each community has its own needs.
Absolutely. But one thing Hendrix made clear, it seems like, is that we got to empower these communities, giving them what they need to rebuild in a way that makes sense for them.
Yeah, recognizing that they already have the strength and resilience inside. We just need to find ways to support them.
So it's not about coming in with solutions from the outside. It's about working together, really listening to the people who are actually there, understanding what matters most to them.
It's about that organic recovery. It's a long process, and it takes a real commitment to helping these communities not just get back to normal, but become even stronger.
So wrapping up our deep dive today, I'm left with this feeling of awe. You know, people are amazing, but also I feel a sense of responsibility.
I know what you mean. We can't just sit back and watch. We got to find ways to contribute, to support these communities, learn from what they've been through, and push for policies that help them recover and become more resilient in the long run.
Right. We went deep on the Waffle House Index today, but hopefully this sparked some new ways of thinking about what rebuilding really means. Not just structures, but lives, whole communities. And maybe it'll even inspire some of you listening to dig deeper into this whole thing. Disaster response, recovery, it's fascinating stuff.
Because at the end of the day, being resilient isn't just about bouncing back, it's about building back better than before, and we all need to be part of that.